Hello and welcome to the AP World History Podcast. So with this podcast, instead of talking about just one subject, I'm going to try to tie together everything that has happened so far in the post-classical period. When I say post-classical, I'm referring to the years 600 to 1450. Right off the bat, what we want to know is that this period comes after the collapse of two pretty major empires in world history. That's the Roman Empire and the Han Empire in China. So what happens in these areas of the world after the collapse of these empires? We'll look at that. In the first unit, we looked at the development of major belief systems, and in this unit, we added one more, which will become central to world history, and that is, of course, the belief system of Islam. So I want to recap the development of Islam and some of the developments in the Islamic world during this time period. We also look at developments in Europe, both Western Europe and the Byzantine Empire. We're going to look at developments in China, developments in India, developments in Japan. We'll also look at the emergence of the Mongol Empire, who are really the builders of the largest empire the world has ever seen, still today in many ways. And we'll also look at Africa. So what happens in Africa during this almost 900-year period? Always as we go through, we want to think of examples of interaction between cultures. The post-classical period, this is a period really full of cross-cultural interaction, and we talked about how cross-cultural interaction happens, usually because either trade or military conquest. You could add missionaries to that list, but in most cases anyways, missionary activity wouldn't be possible without trade or military conquest. In this unit, we really focused on three areas where this cross-cultural interaction was happening. The first, of course, is Silk Roads, which ran from Europe through Central Asia all the way to China. When you're looking at change in continuity over time, the Silk Roads are something that had been continuous. Indian Ocean trade was something that also existed for a long period of time. Trans-Saharan trade was a newer form of trade. So we look at all of those. We look at the Silk Road, the Indian Ocean Network, and Trans-Saharan trade. As I was saying in the beginning, Unit 2 begins with the fall of the classical empires, and almost immediately we see the emergence of a new major belief system, and that is Islam. And Islam is a belief system that's brought to the Arabs of Mecca by the Prophet Muhammad. Muhammad was a merchant, and trade networks were operating in Arabia at the time of Muhammad. Muhammad was really disgusted with the social inequality that came out of the trade that was happening in Mecca. And his position as a merchant also probably caused him some personal anxiety. He thought, maybe I'm contributing to this problem of inequality. So Muhammad had a deep social conscience. He was a thinker, and from time to time, he would leave Mecca to go meditate in the mountains that surrounded the city. And one of the times when he was meditating, he received revelations from the angel Gabriel. And Muhammad brought these revelations to the people of Mecca, and Islam was established. The revelations were eventually recorded in the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book. Islam, it's similar to Christianity and Judaism in the sense that it's a monotheistic religion. Muslims had respect for Christians and Jews. They viewed Jesus and Moses as prophets, and Christianity and Judaism were earlier but less perfect, less established versions of Islam. So you'll hear Muslims refer to Christians and Jews as people of the book because they were partially enlightened individuals. Differences for Muslims, Muhammad was a prophet, but he was the last prophet. So they recognized Jesus, they recognized Moses as prophets, but Muhammad was the final prophets, or the seal of the prophets. Muslims viewed Muhammad differently than Christians viewed Jesus. Muhammad wasn't divine in any way. He was simply a person who received messages from God, whereas in Christianity, Jesus is actually the Son of God. So, when we talk about Islam, the major beliefs that you want to know for sure are the 5 pillars of Islam, and these are extremely important. The first is a confession of faith in one God. So, it's often spoken as there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of that God. So, it's a profession of belief in God and his messenger. The next is to pray 5 times a day. Just to constantly remind yourself that you are in the presence of God. Eventually, it would become pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. The belief that you should give to the poor. So Muhammad really had a problem with the inequality in Mecca, so he wanted to make sure that the needs of all people were met. A belief to fast during the month of Ramadan, which is a period of time in the lunar calendar. And also to make the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life. And this applies to you if you're financially capable of doing this, and if you're physically capable of doing this. It's also important to note the split that happened in Islam, and this split stems from following the death of the Prophet Muhammad, who would lead the Islamic community. So we have a struggle for power following the death of Muhammad, and 2 camps emerge. One camp calls for the leader of the community to be a blood relative of Muhammad. So we refer to these people as Shiite Muslims. The other camp argued that it only needed to be somebody who was selected by the people of the community, and not necessarily a blood relative of Muhammad. We call these people Sunni Muslims. So I just want to backtrack a little bit and look at Muhammad in Mecca. So when Muhammad first brought his revelations to Mecca, he gained a lot of supporters, especially people from the lower class. Remember, his revelations had a message of equality, and a lot of people were suffering in Mecca, so this message appealed to them. The message didn't appeal to rich people or people in power, and the people in power in Mecca persecuted Muhammad, and he was actually set to be executed when he escaped alongside some of his followers. So when Muhammad escaped execution in Mecca, he traveled to Yathrib, which was a community to the north of Mecca. This voyage from Mecca to Yathrib is known as the Hijra, and this is the first year of the Islamic calendar. Once in Yathrib, Muhammad established a community you're probably more familiar with, the name of Medina. Okay, so he established Medina once he was in Yathrib. And here in Medina, Muhammad gained military strength, gained more support, and he would eventually return to Mecca and conquer the city. This was really the beginning of a powerful political state. The first real Islamic empire were the Umayyad, and they conquered North Africa and Spain and were finally stopped in France. When the Umayyad falls apart, we have the emergence of the Abbasid dynasty, and the Abbasids would stay in power until the 13th century when they were overthrown by the Mongols. During the period of the Abbasid and the Umayyad, we have really a flowering of Islamic culture. This was a time of learning, of art, of architecture, with the mosques. Scholars in the Islamic world translated and made copies of classical works from the Greek world. During the Crusades, Christian crusaders, through their interaction with the Islamic world, took a lot of this learning that was preserved by Muslims back with them. So when we talk about the Renaissance, which is the rebirth of classical ideas of Greece and Rome, these ideas didn't really ever die out in the Islamic world. And one of the major impacts of the Crusade is this learning from the Islamic world that Western Europeans were able to obtain through their interactions with Muslims. But really, overall, in this unit, we see the emergence of Islam. We see the emergence of Islamic states, the Umayyad, the Abbasid. We touch briefly on the Ottomans, but they'll play a much bigger role in the next unit, along with newer Islamic states, the Safavids and the Mughals. One of the big topics in this unit or this time period is trade, and we're going to focus on three major trading networks. The first being the Indian Ocean Basin. When we talk about the Indian Ocean trade, we want to remember the importance of the monsoon winds. The Indian Ocean made possible contact between many different places, from East Africa to Arabia to India to Southeast Asia, all the way to China, and it made this possible because sailors could use the monsoon winds to travel fairly easily. Long distance trade, long distance travel became possible. After the rise of Islam, the Indian Ocean network made possible the spread to the different places on the trade network Islam, and Islam would spread extensively along the trade network throughout the Indian Ocean. Another trade network that we spoke a little bit about with the Han and Roman Empire is the Silk Road. And during the classical period, this trade network connected really the two biggest empires in the world, although they weren't really in direct contact with each other. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to overland trade, business is good when the trade routes are under somebody's control. A merchant will always be more keen to travel and trade when things are stable. A merchant doesn't really want to go out there if you're going to run into bandits who are going to take your stuff from you. In the post-classical era, it's the Mongols who would bring control and stability to the Silk Road. So just in terms of chronology, Genghis Khan would unite the Mongols in the late 1100s, and in the 1200s, the Mongols became a dominant power. Mongols obviously caused a lot of damage when they stormed through civilizations, but it's also important to note they made possible the widespread exchange and sharing of ideas. Finally, the other major trade network or place of interaction was over the Sahara Desert, which became an extremely well-developed trade network during the post-classical era. So the trans-Saharan trade depended on the camel, which was needed for really the long caravan treks across the Saharan desert. Trade across the Sahara really took off when Muslim merchants from North Africa would venture into West Africa, mainly looking for gold. And the wealth from this trans-Saharan trade created some of the powerful West African empires, Ghana, later Mali. So within these zones, you get the movement of goods through the Indian Ocean, through the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, through the Silk Road. These trade routes basically connected all of Africa and Eurasia. But on top of just the spreading of goods and technology, you also get the spreading of ideas, and that includes the spreading of religions. So Islam would be spread extensively through merchants. Christian missionaries from Byzantium and later Western Europe would travel long trade routes. So you have Christian communities emerging in places like Ethiopia. And then further east, we have Buddhist monks that would travel and spread Buddhism along the Silk Road and in the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Alright, so now what's going on in Asia during this time period? So we'll start with China, and where we left China in the Foundations unit was with the collapse of the Han Dynasty. And it's going to take China some time to regain unity, to unify again. And one pattern you should be seeing in the history of China is how it really alternates between periods of stability with strong dynasties and periods of disunity. In China, a term that we use to describe this political disunity is warring states. In the first unit, we talked about the initial or original warring states period between the collapse of the Zhao dynasty and the formation of the Qin dynasty. And in this period of war and destruction, major Chinese belief systems of Confucianism and Taoism emerged to provide people with some order and some guidance in their lives. So eventually, we get the emergence of the Sui dynasty, who would unify China, but they didn't really last for long. And immediately after the Sui, we get two dynasties who would rule China for roughly 600 years. The first of these dynasties is the Tang dynasty, and they come to power in the mid 600s, and they really bring together a large part of the old Han Empire and even push the empire further west than it had ever been before, really along the Silk Road trade network. After the Tang, we move into the Song dynasty, and they come along in the 900s, and they would last until the arrival of the Mongols in the 1270s. So these dynasties were really stable periods in Chinese history. And when you have stability, you have lots of public works projects. So we see the building of canals. The Sui dynasty built the Grand Canal that connected the Yangtze and the Yellow River. The building of roads, irrigation projects. And you also have the production of a lot of goods and lots of trade. And goods were shipped along the Silk Road trade network, and this brought a lot of money into China. So most Chinese dynasties are organized under the principles of Confucianism, and the Tang and the Song are no exception. But we also see the emergence of new religions during this time period having more of an influence in China. So we see the arrival of Buddhism in China, for example. And Buddhism came to China primarily along the Silk Road. So Confucianism, if you remember, it's really a secular philosophy. It focuses on matters of this world, but it doesn't provide people with a lot of spiritual guidance. And this is something that other religions do, like Buddhism, for example, Taoism. The more spiritual, more metaphysical religion. So what happened with Confucianism, some thinkers transformed it and created a new school of thought known as Neo-Confucianism. The belief was that regular Confucianism didn't really do enough to address the spiritual needs of the people. People needed some sort of spiritual outlet, so it adopted some of the spiritual elements from religions like Buddhism and Taoism. Another major continuity in Chinese society is the civil service examination based on the principles of Confucianism. So, in order to get a good government job, you needed to do well on the civil service examination. And you can sort of look at this as an attempt to have a meritocracy in China to make sure that the most able people are in the bureaucracy and running the government. So, technically the exams are open to anybody, but if you think about it, a lot of people didn't have the time or the money to invest into studying. Okay, so most people needed to work, most people needed their children to work, and if you were going to do well on the exam, you'd have to hire tutors, which would cost lots of money. So really, not everybody could do this. So the civil exam, or the civil service exam, rather, stays. These were always rigorous exams, and to some extent, that culture of examination is still very much a part of East Asia. So we also talked about the tribute system in this unit. China wasn't always looking to take over territory. Rather, they would strike up agreements with rulers in nearby places like Korea and Vietnam, and they'd let these people look after their own affairs as long as they gave China a little something in the form of tribute payments. China would have a much harder time collecting tribute from Japan. Fast forwarding to the 1200s, the Mongols take over China under the leadership of Kublai Khan, and Mongols establish the Yuan dynasty. So the Yuan dynasty, they build a large empire, roughly the size of what China is today, and the Yuan would rule for almost 100 years. So in the big picture of Chinese history, it's a fairly short occupation, and they would eventually be overthrown by the Ming dynasty. And It talks a little bit about the Ming Dynasty in this unit, but they'll be focused on a lot more in the following unit. I didn't speak much about Japan in the Middle Kingdom podcast, so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about it here, and maybe talk about some of the differences between Japan and China. So China was, or the history of China is marked by periods of stability and instability, so periods of big empires and then periods of political fragmentation. Japan is different. It's much harder to unify Japan. So Japan, there wasn't really the big empires in the post-classical period, and a big reason for this is the geography of Japan. Lots of islands and lots of mountains. So China struggles to exert the same kind of political control over Japan that it did over other states that it was connected to by land, like Korea and Vietnam. But Japan would borrow a lot culturally from China. So Buddhism becomes the important belief system in Japan, and the Japanese version of Buddhism is known as Zen Buddhism. But Japan also had its own nature spirit worship system called Shintoism. The ideas of Confucianism also have influence in Japan, as do the characters in Chinese writings. Japanese writings heavily influenced from Chinese writing. But Japan's politically fragmented place, so if you want to compare it to another part of the world around this time, the best comparison would probably be feudal Europe. So areas in Japan were controlled by these warlords who are known as shoguns. And just below the shogun, you have the daimyos, and they're like the local landlords. So the lords of various parts of Japan that operated much like lords would operate in medieval Europe. And the daimyos would employ warriors known as samurai. So they're kind of similar to knights in feudal Europe. During this time, India is becoming a very diverse place. It's right in the middle of the Indian Ocean trade network, so it's getting influence from all these different places that are a part of the trade network. And during this time, Buddhism starts to fall out of favor, and we see the reemergence of Hinduism as the religion of the people of India. But to spice things up a bit, we also have the arrival of Islam to India, and Islam comes to India in a couple of different ways that are important to know about. In northern India, we have the Delhi Sultanate, which was an Islamic state founded by Turkic people. So in the Sultanate, the rulers, the government officials, they're all Muslims, but they were ruling a state where there were multiple religions, multiple ethnicities. So it forced some religious toleration, some compromises to accommodate religious diversity. And as I mentioned earlier, Islam came to the south of India through trade, through the port cities that really participated in the Indian Ocean trade. So, post-classical Europe, what do we need to know? First off, this is after the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire ruled centrally, it protected trade routes, provided people with some security, and when the Roman Empire fell, all of these things were gone. People lacked unity, there was a lack of stability that was provided by the Roman Empire. So, in terms of unity, the Catholic Church came in and provided some unity for the people. So it's during the post-classical period that Christianity really takes root in Western Europe. But faith, it can give you spiritual stability, but it can't really protect you from getting robbed or getting killed from invaders. So a system had to emerge to give people some real-life security, some physical, tangible security. And in Western Europe, this came in the form of the feudal system, which was fairly oppressive for the people involved, but at the same time allowed people to live without being in constant fear of their lives. In the feudal system, lords would grant land to vassals, and vassals would protect that land and protect people. So we see castles being built all over Western Europe for protection. People living in the countryside could retreat to the security of the castle walls. during an invasion. There was a question on the AP exam a few years back where students were asked to compare Japanese and European feudalism. So we have some ideas. The idea of a king is pretty similar to the idea of a shogun in Japan. The shogun were the warlords. We have the local lords in Europe and the daimyos in Japan. We have the knights in Europe, and you have the samurai in Japan. Their jobs or their functions were fairly similar. They're hired to protect the people and protect the land. We have the code of chivalry in Europe, and we have the code of Bushido in Japan. So during this time, Western Europe faced invasions from people moving into Europe and pressing onto European boundaries. So from the north, we have movement of Vikings. From the east, we have various nomadic people coming to Europe, including the Mongols. And from the south, we have Islamic civilization. So if you remember, the Islamic world pushed all the way up into Spain and into parts of France. But through everything, a sense of stability does start to return to Europe. We have the establishment of the first universities during this period, and a lot of the classical texts that disappeared after the fall of the Roman Empire began to come back to Europe through the Byzantine Empire, and especially through the Islamic world. And when these classical Greek texts come back to Europe, along with Muslim commentaries on them, and original texts from the Muslim world as well, we really get an explosion of new ideas in Europe. So, we call this period the Dark Ages because after the fall of the Roman Empire, things were pretty horrible for people living there. There was political fragmentation, warfare, but life does eventually get better. A lot of change begins to take place. Christianity is always the important religion, but the state becomes more important as well. And one of the recurring themes in this time period is the struggle between religious and political leaders. And by the early 1000s, this struggle between religion and politics was really coming to a head. In 1054, we have what is referred to as the Schism in Christianity, which is the division of the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern or Greek Orthodox Church. And this split arises because the Pope in Rome viewed himself as the supreme ruler of the Christian world, and the religious and political leaders in the Byzantine Empire, they thought differently. So we have Eastern Orthodox in the Byzantine Empire, and they spoke Greek, and we have Roman Catholicism in Western Europe who spoke Latin. And this, still to this day, is one of the lasting divisions in Christianity. The next major division we're going to explore in the next unit, and that's the Protestant Reformation. So, jumping ahead to the Crusades, in the Dark Ages, there's constant warfare between various kingdoms in Europe. A lot of these kingdoms converted to Christianity, so we had lots of situations where it's Christians fighting Christians, and the church just basically told people, instead of fighting each other, why don't you fight the guys in the Holy Land instead? So this was attractive for kings who wanted to expand their territory and open up more trade routes. The Islamic world was more advanced, it was wealthier, it was also the birthplace of Christianity, so it seemed like a good place to go. Eventually, it seems that the religious mission of the Crusades kind of disappeared over time. So we see this in 1204 when Crusaders are moving through the Christian city of Constantinople. They massacred a large population of Constantinople, so it's not a very Christian thing to do to other Christians. They robbed the city. They did that to fund their crusades. In terms of long-term impact with the Crusades, there wasn't really any long-term impact in terms of empire building or land gain or anything like that. The Crusades seem definitely to have more of an impact on Christians than they did Muslims. So it led to a lot of cross-cultural interaction and a lot of learning and technology from the Islamic world spread to Western Europe. So the reality is that through that interaction, Europeans had a lot more to learn from the Islamic world than the Islamic world had to learn from Europeans at this time. And Muslims even for a long time sort of forgot about the Crusades, and the memory of the Crusades didn't really come back to the Islamic world or come back into the consciousness of the Islamic world until the context of much more recent European global dominance or European imperialism. So, fast forward a bit, we have the arrival of the Mongols in Europe. The Mongols never really pushed into Western Europe. They were going to, but on the way, the great Khan Ogadai, who was Genghis Khan's son, died. And for the Mongols, when the great Khan died, it meant that all of the military leaders had to return to Mongolia. So Europe was essentially spared the massacre that happened in other parts of the world, in China, in the Islamic world, in Russia. But Europeans were impacted profoundly by the Mongols, and they were impacted both in positive ways and in really negative ways. So I'll start with the positives. The Mongol Empire joined the Silk Road trading network under the power of one empire, so it was a really stable trading network during this time, and it made trading easy and attractive. So the most famous European merchant is Marco Polo, and he traveled all over Eurasia. He traveled all the way to China during this time period. It's also important to remember that Mongols were uncommonly tolerant of different religions, so missionary activity succeeded very well along the Silk Road. So you have Christian missionaries traveling all over the Mongol trading networks. So that helped spread Christianity, also helped spread Islam as well. In terms of negative impacts, as we move into the 1300s, everything sort of starts to fall apart. We have the emergence of the Black Death, which originated in China, but traveled along the Silk Road trading network, and this wipes out probably between a quarter and a third of the population in Western Europe. So that's another important thing to keep in mind, is that times when you have a lot of interaction happening, those are also times that are more susceptible to disease. And towards the end of this time period, we get over the bubonic plague, and the unit kind of ends with the beginning of the Renaissance and moving towards the age of exploration. So up until this point, Western Europe was much less advanced than, say, China or the Islamic world, but European dominance will start to emerge in the next unit at least. So why Europe, why not China or the Islamic world will be one of the questions that we continue to explore in the next two units. During the post-classical period, we see the emergence of the first really powerful states in sub-Saharan Africa. So obviously in the first unit we looked at powerful states in North Africa, most notably the Egyptians, but we didn't talk about sub-Saharan Africa very much. So in the post-classical period, Islam would come to North Africa through military conquest. It would spread from Arabia all through North Africa up into Spain before it got stopped in France. But Islam didn't come to sub-Saharan Africa through military conquest. Instead, it came through trade. So one of the civilizations you want to know about is one that emerged with the Indian Ocean Trading Network in East Africa. This is Swahili civilization. So Swahili is an Arabic term for coasters or people of the coast. And we see some big cities, big trading centers emerging along the East African coast, places like Mombasa, Mogadishu, Zanzibar are all good examples of places that emerged during this time period. Swahili language is a blending of Bantu, traditional Bantu languages with Arabic. So you can think of that Swahili, it's a combination of traditional African culture or traditional Bantu culture with Arabic culture. Further north, closer to the Red Sea, we have the kingdoms of Kush and Aksum. And Aksum will be influenced by Christian traders and missionaries and will convert to Christianity. So Islam is much more successful in Africa than Christianity is, but there are some places where Christianity takes a hold. And Aksum is really modern day Ethiopia, which is still a Christian country, although it's a different Christianity than what's practiced in Western Europe or America, for example. Moving west, we have the kingdoms that got rich off the trans-Saharan trade. Sometimes we call these the gold kingdoms. So in the post-classical period, you want to know about Ghana and Mali. The most famous West African ruler was probably a guy known as Mansa Musa, and he made the pilgrimage from Mali to Mecca with upwards of 60,000 people, and he brought a lot of gold with him on his trip. And he spent so much gold, or gave so much gold away as presents, that he caused the value of gold in Eurasia to plummet dramatically. So they had lots of gold, and they brought that with them. Moving south, we have the area of Great Zimbabwe. They traded with the East African coast, but also in southern Africa, we have a lot of what are called stateless societies. So these are smaller scale farming communities that weren't affiliated with a larger empire. One of the challenges for historians when working with sub-Saharan Africa is piecing the history together. A lot of the literature was transmitted orally, but we see that through both the Trans-Saharan Trade Network and the Indian Ocean Network, Africa, both North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, were very much plugged in with Eurasian society by the end of the post-classical period. I'm going to leave the Americas out of this podcast review. The main reason is that there's not direct contact with the Afro-Eurasian world, and most of what I've been talking about is how Africa and Eurasia were connected during this time period. So if you want a review of the America, listen to the America podcast again. So America was still not connected with Eurasia or with Africa at this time. This will all change in our next unit, and we'll see cross-cultural interaction happening throughout the entire world, bringing America into these trade networks, spreading religion, particularly Roman Catholicism, to America, and really bringing America in very much against their will into the larger Afro-Eurasian network. So I'll just leave off by asking the question, was the Afro-Eurasian world truly a global economy by the end of the post-classical period? Were goods and ideas connected in a way that everybody could get anything from anywhere? So you think about the connections that were happening. We have the Silk Road trade, which was at its high point when the Mongols provided security over the entire area. The Silk Road connecting pretty much Western Europe all the way to China. We have the Indian Ocean trade. This really connects East Africa to Arabia, to India, to Southeast Asia, to the South China Sea. So we have maritime connections connecting East Africa to China. We have North Africa, which is connected to Arabia through Islam. Arabia is connected to both the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade, and they were connected to sub-Saharan Africa through really well-developed trans-Saharan trade networks. We also have other things driving interaction. The Crusades connected Western Europe, which for a long time had been isolated from really the advanced civilizations of the world and living in the so-called Dark Ages. So it would be too much of a generalization to say that Crusaders went to the Islamic world, brought some books back, and that led to the Renaissance. But definitely their interactions with the ideas and technologies of the Islamic world, and maybe to a lesser extent the Byzantine world, did a lot to pull Western Europe out of those dark ages. So just moving forward towards the next unit, will look like Western Europe up until this point has been relatively isolated, not really a dominant player on the world stage. And next unit, we'll start to see the emergence of Western Europe as one of the world's dominant players. So this is the end of the podcast review of the post-classical unit. Thanks for listening. Good luck on the test.